Now that the sound's there, I'm going to put the bend deformer in to control the bend of the vertebral column. So really what I'm doing is I'm going to control this curve. So let's just review real quick. This is the curve that is controlling the spline IK. The movement or position of the vertices, the purple dots you see here, on this curve is determining the position of the joints, and the joints determining the position of the vertebra. Okay, so what we're going to do with this bend deformer is we're going to create a deformer that's going to average mathematically the motion of all of the CVs under its control. Okay, so when I first select the curve, and just so to make sure so you understand how I've gotten this. So this is my camera. My render camera's got the polygons and deformers showing. This is my perspective window, and the only thing I'm showing is the curves, the NURB curves, the NURB CVs, and I'm going to show the deformers because although that shows all the lattices, it's the only way I can see the bend handle is to have the deformer option on. So I could go over here and select all these lattices and then do a control or a command H or control H and hide them, and that will at least make it. I could do the same thing for all the clusters, but I think at least we'll get the idea. So I select the curve first, and then I go under the deform menu and I look for the nonlinear, and the top option is the bend deformer. There isn't really anything I want to change here. It's got a low bound of -1, a high bound of 1. That's the range it's going to be. It's arbitrary, you'll see in a second. And the curvature is 0, meaning it's not affecting the curve at all. So this straight line right now is now the bend deformer. And if I hit the letter T for the transform tool and I move this curvature point, the one in the center, you see what's happening. I can show you my camera view here. It's actually orientated a little awkwardly so that it's making my spine bend left to right as opposed to anterior to posterior. So I'm going to select the curve. Give me the object, Jesus. Okay, I've got the object selected now. That's my bend handle. And then what I'm going to do is just rotate it. And a lot of times I can rotate it. So I'm rotating the y-axis right now. I believe that's the right one. Yeah, you see that's better. Okay, so I'm going to go back into my, you can see this is the rotation I've done has changed this. So I'm going to make this exactly 90 degrees. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is move this entire deformer lower so that the curvature point is right about at the base of the lumbar, about L5, and I'm actually going to move it forward a little bit. I found like this was a help. Now I'm going to hit the letter T, which allows me this transform tool, allows me to move this lower bound, this dot down here, up right next to that. And if you look at the bend deformer, you can see where the values are now changed. Remember the lower bound, the low bound was -1. It's now 0.0. If I do that, it's actually right at the curvature point. The upper envelope is at 1. And again, it's all relative. And I'm going to take that down so it's closer to about T12L1. All right, now if I move my transform point, see, this is part of the problem with putting that low bound exactly at 0. Then I'm kind of competing with the curvature point. So I'm moving it, putting it to negative 0.03 for the low bound. There we go. That gives me a little bit of a separation. Okay. And now you can see I can move it okay, now what you want to do is evaluate then where the optimal position is for the whole thing. So in other words, just because mine worked at this position, it's not necessarily going to be ideal for you. So how do you, what kind of things do you have to vary? See, I'm getting kind of kinked right here. So let's see if I move this down a little bit and maybe a little bit more forward. And what if I move my upper bound up a little bit higher? So now I've got a curve that gives me somewhat reasonable. I mean, this is not going to be perfect. And if you really have a problem, what you're going to have to do is go back to the neutral position, delete the delete the bend handle, delete the curve, the IK handle as well, and reposition joints inside the vertebrae. But usually what you can do is work with varying these positions so that you can get kind of a better. And also you got to remember, you're not going to necessarily come in quite this tight, but that's pretty good. We've got a pretty good curvature. What you want to avoid, what I want you to avoid, is having a bone literally go through another bone. You can't have the vertebra body of one vertebra pierce the other vertebra. And again, don't forget, you can actually move this thing. See, and that's kind of giving me a little bit better. And the letter T, the transfer tool, lets you change it. So let's see, when I come back now, if I go back to a bend curvature value of 0, which should be perfectly neutral, I'm okay. And then if I go to a curvature value of I didn't pay attention there, but let's say, no, let's just do it then with the handle. So that's good. I mean, that, somebody can touch their toes. Their upper extremity is going to come out of that glenoid fossa and be able to touch their toes. So that's a pretty good curve. So, and my curvature value there is, negative 383.23. That's not going to be the same for you, but that's something just to keep in mind. So when we go into our animation, down here I've got my soundtrack. And if I left mouse and drag, and I go at just about the right pace, I can hear what it's saying. Okay, so that's what I'm considering a 90-degree bend. So I want that position at the end of my animation, right? The end of that phrase, because that's what it says. Okay, so I'm going to put my playhead here at 425, click on the word curvature and say key selected. Now I know before that point I want the vertebral column in the neutral position. So I'll change that curvature value to 0. And again, key selected. So during the first part of this, this area here, you can see the waveform, so you can see where the talking is. This is all talking about So basically this is just talking about the lumbar vertebra. So I'm going to have to figure something out, like maybe I'm going to zoom in, or maybe I'm going to spin, around, highlighting that. There's a number of things I might try just to kind of give me some movement. But then when I get to this part, it's going to animate. Now I'm going to have to come down to, let's say, here. So I'm at 423. Let's give it like about half a second. And I'm going to key it again. So all I'm doing here is basically holding that position. Okay, I'm just freezing my keyframe at that position. Okay. Now what I want to do is obviously come out of that. So it took me from about 272 to 423. So like 160 frames. So let's do like 150 frames. So 442 would be 592. So let's extend the number of frames we can see. Go to 5, like I said, 92. So let's go to 600. And then let's change the curvature value to 0. All right, and key it. So now basically I hold the flexion, and then I come back out to the neutral position, and then I'm going to go into my extension. Now that means I don't want my extension timeline starting, or narration starting to someplace after 600. So let's say maybe 610. So if I right mouse on my soundtrack, go to audio, and say extension, I'm like way back here. So I have to get the attribute editor for the extension, and I need to pick it from the outliner, and this is the offset value we saw in the instructions, and I'm going to change that to 610. So now the extension is moving, the narration about the extension at least is moved later in the timeline. Okay, and if I go back and scrub, we should see we go down for the flexion, back up, hold the neutral position, and now we're waiting to start the process again for the extension, and we would do the same. We would again begin animating our bend deformer. Okay.